I wish I could be present with you today physically in Arusha. Unfortunately, I couldn't make the trip from Singapore, but it's my privilege really to spend the next 15 minutes with you and talk to you about IPID and the role that we can play in bridging Mojaloop with the rest of the world. My name is Damien. I'm the co-founder and CEO of IPID, and I'll be leading this session today together with Michael from Mojaloop. On the agenda, we have two parts. The first part will be driven by myself, and that will be a virtual session. I'll be telling you about us, IPID, who we are, what we have in common, and also what is different between us and Mojaloop. We'll then go into the importance of remittances, which is the core of IPID's business, and the importance of digital remittances. And then finally, the role that IPID plays in the global financial infrastructure to provide a global addressing service, but also a connector to global, to closed loop ecosystems, such as Mojaloop and Wallet. Then we'll have a more interactive session that Michael will drive and will lead. And so there will be a discussion among yourselves, so in the audience in Arusha. Without further ado, let me tell you a bit more about who we are at IPID. We founded IPID last year in 2021 with several co-founders. All of us collectively have more than a century of experience in cross-border payments, mostly at Swift, but also in different organizations. And so we've been essentially active in the space in Asia Pacific, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in Europe. And so what we set ourselves as a mission as an organization at IPID is essentially to make cross-border payments as easy as sending or receiving a text message. So essentially removing all the complexity of providing complicated banking details like a big code and account number, sorting codes, and so forth. We're supported by a strong board of advisors. One of our advisor is Costa, someone that probably some of you already know is the chair of Mojaloop. And so Costa also helped us to identify synergy between Mojaloop and IPID, and that's also why we're here today. So what do we have in common at Mojaloop and at IPID? Essentially, both of us have that mission, or as an outcome, we enable proxy payments or payments based on a proxy, either locally in a Mojaloop environment for Mojaloop or globally for cross-border transactions at IPID. What I mean with proxy payments, essentially I mean payments that are based on a mobile number, an email address, or corporate registration number. But so where a proxy is used to identify the recipient instead of providing complicated banking details. So we at IPID provide the infrastructure to enable global proxy-based payments. The reason why we focus on cross-border and remittances is essentially because remittances are a key contributor to economic growth in emerging markets. What you see here on the left side is the weight or the importance of remittances as percentage of the GDP globally and more specifically in Africa. And we see that importance has only increased in the past 20 years. And in some countries, as you can see here on the right side, the weight of remittances in the domestic GDP can go as high as 20% or close to 20%. So remittances are key and strategic for many countries. And also what is key, obviously, is to drive down the cost of sending remittances. So essentially enabling families to receive more of the cash that is sent by the loved one overseas. It has been set even as a goal by the UN, a sustainable development goal with a target of remittances executed at 3% of less of the cost for by 2030. And we see that the main way essentially to achieve that target of 3% is to move remittances from cash, which are more expensive, to digital remittances, which are cheaper. So driving the digitization of remittances also allows really families to get more of that precious income that they receive from overseas. The role that we play at IPID in that drive towards digitization is, on the one hand, to improve the user experience for digital remittances for the sender by making remittances as easy as sending a text message, as well as reducing operational costs for banks, payment fintechs, and so forth, because we remove data errors that are making essentially cross-border payments or remittances to fail or to require manual intervention to repair a wrong BIC code, a wrong account number, and so forth. So you have to know that today, between 5 to 10% of cross-border payments fail or need a manual intervention because of data errors. And that is really creating costs and adding up to the cost of remittances. And the official statistics on that, so that's the World Bank that has made a study on the cost of remittances and looking at the two big components of the cost, FX margin and fees, we actually see that the fees, which are the result of manual intervention, for instance, so the fees are the bulk of the cost. And so we at IPID, as I mentioned, drive the digitization by improving the experience and driving that cost down. How do we do that? So at IPID, what we do is that we provide a global platform, a global infrastructure to enable banks and fintech to move data. What we do not do is that we do not move funds. We do not do FX. We do not process payments. So in that sense, we're very different from banks. We're different from an MFS Africa or other aggregators. What we move, as I said, is data to enable proxy payments. And we do that via two services, essentially. One is what we call an addressing and proxy resolution service, where we essentially resolve a phone number into the banking details for payments to bank accounts. The second one is IPID acting as a connector to closed-loop environments like wallets or Mojaloop payment systems, for instance, that are already using proxies in that closed-loop environment. Let me tell you a bit more about both services. Regarding the proxy service and the proxy resolution service, I won't go into the details, but essentially what we offer is for banks or fintech on the sending side, that can be a Western Union, that can be a BNP Paribas, for instance, that they can call our API with a phone number. And we then use our platform to fetch the beneficiary details, the banking details of the receiver that are associated to that phone number. We bring that information back to the sender, the fintech or the bank, so that they can execute the payment. So through that, we again improve the user experience because there is no need for the senders or receivers to exchange banking details. And also we drive down costs because we bring authenticated banking details from the source, meaning the beneficiary institution. The second service that we offer, and that is probably the most relevant in the context of Mojaloop, is IPID as a connector to closed-loop proxy-based environments. These environments can be wallets, mobile money wallets. It can be also payment systems, and for instance, Mojaloop-based payment systems. And so there we act as that bridge, that connector, that data layer between the sending institutions outside of the closed loop and the closed loop themselves. If we double click on Mojaloop itself, so essentially what we do is also what was, I think, labeled as the cross-network provider in the context of Mojaloop. So we act as that data bridge between institutions outside of Mojaloop, banks, payment fintech, for instance. So we act as that bridge into the Mojaloop environment. Again, we don't do the money movements. We don't do the FX. It's a different role as an FX provider. Other institutions would do that. We really act as that connector to bring more volumes into the scheme, as well as expand the reach of the scheme. The objective of our role here is, as I mentioned, to enable global proxy payments, but also to bring that cross-border interoperability for Mojaloop payment systems, for instance. So improve user experience for the sender and the receiver, lower cost, and hence increase the amount of cash, amount of money that is really received on the account by the receivers, and improve data security because there is no need anymore to exchange complicated banking details via emails, SMS, or WhatsApp. With that, I'll hand it over to Michael, who will talk a bit more about Mojaloop and bring that back into the Mojaloop roadmap. And also it will be great to hear some feedback on the role that we are proposing to play and potential questions or feedback on that. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Damien. So I'm just going to look briefly through the sequence that we think will happen and then talk a little bit about some of the issues, and in particular, the issues about how much will be done once and for all and how much will need to be done differently for different schemes. Okay, so the idea is that, right, so starts off, the originating institution makes a payment request via IPID. No, didn't. There we go. IPID will route the request to the appropriate Mojaloop cross-network provider, which is our old friend from when we were originally talking about connecting systems with each other. But one of the things I want to add is that, in principle, the cross-network provider would not need to be more than a normal participant in the Mojaloop system who was able to receive the IPID requests. So it's possible to imagine, for instance, that Dugauquier, whom we saw earlier, would work with IPID to receive IPID requests coming into TIPS, let's say. So anyway, goes to the cross-network provider. The cross-network provider manages the currency conversion. Now, it wouldn't need to be like that. Of course, it would be possible for the originating institution to do the currency conversion itself and send the funds in the target currency. But our expectation is that it's going to be cheaper and more efficient to do it in the target scheme. First of all, because it's very likely that participants in that scheme will be able to convert into the target currency. And second of all, because it's, generally speaking, we think going to be easier to get people to become foreign exchange providers in those schemes. And of course, it's always possible that the cross-network provider itself might provide those foreign exchange services. But anyway, now get it converted into the target currency. It gets sent to the Mojaloop switch in the target currency. The cross-network provider then reports back on the status to IPID, which sends its information back to the original payment requester. And finally, the switch records the obligations and manages settlement. Now, you'll recall that Damien said that IPID itself is not interested in settlement. In this world, it's the cross-network provider who is the debit party in the Mojaloop settlement. So nothing needs to happen in the Mojaloop scheme for settlement to work correctly, but somehow the funds need to arrive from the originating institution, either in the source currency or in the target currency, at the cross-network provider. And that is, at the moment, outside the scope of the things that we are looking at from a design perspective. So I'm going to go on now and say, here are some questions. We assume that these will be of a standard form, i.e. that there will be, sorry?
Just curious, Michael, the standard form, why is iPad in that position rather than that?
Well, this is more the question of how the requests will appear. So the idea here is that an iPad request will be an iPad request, and that if you want to join the iPad service, one of the commitments you will make is that you will make payment requests using the iPad format and not just throw an ISO 20022 message over the fence and expect iPad to sort it out. Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I'll leave it there.
It's all right. You can beat me up afterwards. I can take it. So the requests will also be in the same format. We can manage currency conversion in a standard way, provided that the target schemes support currency conversion. Now, those of you who've been paying attention during our remote sessions will know that we've been doing some work in the Mojaloop Foundation on a currency conversion API. And this design assumes, first of all, that that API can be accepted. And second of all, that the Mojaloop scheme has at least one currency conversion provider so that funds can be converted. Okay, that is, we think, the only change to the Mojaloop scheme that needs to happen. It must be able to support currency conversion, but it can support it in a standard way, or at least a scheme-specific way. Now, the other thing that we are assuming is that schemes will permit single-phase transfers from outside the system. Now, what does that mean? You ask, I ask myself that question. What it means is that, as all of you Mojaloop fans will know, we operate a 2- or 3-phase execution process. So first of all, we discover who we are supposed to be paying. Second, we come to agreement on the terms of the payment. And third, we actually execute the payment. Now, there are kinds of schemes where it doesn't matter so much about that. We assume that the first phase, discovery, has already been outsourced to iPad, and that iPad will therefore have a reliable way of identifying a payee in a scheme. But nevertheless, in cases, for instance, where schemes allow fees to be generated, it might be that the regulator of the scheme does not allow single-phase transfers, particularly, let's say, from people outside the system, but requires a 2-phase transfer in the standard Mojaloop way. This we are not assuming at the moment. So settlement is always going to be scheme-specific. And as I've said, we are expecting that the cross-network provider will be the responsible party for settlement, and that part of its engagement with iPad will be a way for funds actually to be moved from the originating institution to the cross-network provider. Now, that's a bit of an elephant in the room at the moment. We're going to have to think through that and figure out, well, sorry, when I say we, I mean, iPad probably already figured this out. They just didn't tell me about it yet. And finally, the question is, different schemes may have different requirements for regulatory compliance. And obviously, people who are sending to institutions in those schemes will need to have a way of understanding how those will be communicated to the sender institutions. The expectation at the moment there is that there will be a process by which a scheme connects to the iPad system, i.e. the regulators of a scheme allow participants to receive funds that are sent via iPad. And our expectation is that part of that will include a statement by the regulator of the KYC information that will need to be included with a payment request. iPad will store that, and they will be responsible for communicating to their sending institutions the KYC requirements for the particular target that is being requested by their payment institutions. So as I say, the idea is that that will be something which will be managed by IPID as part of their interaction with the sending institutions. And it's not going to be something that's going to change very frequently. It will typically be the kind of thing that will be set up when a scheme decides that it will participate in the IPID scheme, and the same, well, at the same point as the integration between the IPID system and the customer discovery system in the Mojaloop scheme is set up. So that's all I have to say on that topic. Anyone got any questions? I see, amazingly, that John Mark has a question. Oh, sorry, and Steve has a question too.
Thanks, Mike. I think this is a great model. Basically, saying this is a great model which tries to solve a problem we probably already solved.
Ah.
So looking at today's, my voice is louder. Looking at today's solutions we have on international remittances. For example, if I take Tanzania as an example, MNOs and banks are connected through different, we call them hubs, being it MFS Africa, being it Tunes. We have more than 5 big providers who have got models where we have developed a similar kind of a solution. So my biggest question to you is, while this is coming, and while the central bank is moving us to TIPS, so the element of TIPS, which has this, is not yet there, it's the next phase. So the question is, how do we accommodate existing providers? Because this is a lot of big business right now. We have a lot of remittances from across the world. Every country is already connected through these providers who have done a great work of working with either MTOs or MNOs in those countries. I'll give an example of US and Europe, where most of the inward remittances are coming from to Tanzania. We have been able, through these aggregators, been able to connect, and we have a similar model. So the question is, how do you make sure that the existing model also, with the players, is also protected?
So my expectation is that would, where the models already exist, that they can be accommodated via the cross-network provider model. So what we want to do, in the same way as when we implemented TIPS, sorry, when Tanzania implemented TIPS, it said we're going to move from point-to-point interaction between different institutions to a hub and spoke architecture where each institution only needs to integrate once. We would expect that to happen with the cross-border in providers as well. So a cross-border provider, cross-network provider would only need to have one presence in the TIPS system in order for it to be able to route payments to every institution that belonged to TIPS. And that would include not only the existing financial institutions, but also, for instance, smaller institutions such as MFIs and SACCOs, who probably don't have that connection at the moment, but who would like it. So it's an efficiency improvement and infrastructure reduction and cost reduction proposal. I notice also that we are happy to have among us people from, of course, I've now forgotten what their name is. Van Boom, where do you come from? Where do you? Yeah. So they, I think, are interested, perhaps even very interested, in becoming a cross-network provider in the TIPS system. So that, as you say, will immediately provide those kinds of external interface. However, there may very well be Mojaloop schemes in the future who don't benefit from the forward thinking that's already happened in Tanzania and which has enabled them already to be in a space where their customers can start to receive, as you say, remittances from anywhere in the world. That's not true for everybody. And we want to provide solutions for the people who don't have it, as well as for the people who do. Does that answer your question? It's a pleasure. John Mark.
Thank you, Michael. I would need you to help me understand this a little bit better. I know the teams from IPID made the presentation, but if I look at the setup, the sending institutions, the originating IPID cross network, I'm still not clear what problem do we solve by putting IPID and then the cross network provider. I would like you to, maybe with an example, to give the actual problem that we are solving. Of course, as we're solving the problem, we are giving the value. Maybe as you think of the response to that, I would give you a different scenario. For instance, I know in our setup where we are receivers, like at the MTO side, we are largely receivers. There is a setup where the senders may be going to use cards. And when the senders are going to use cards, I've seen in our own setup, we're trying to do things with VisaNet or the card scheme such that the sender can send a card scheme and then resolves. There is a problem that we understand. But in this case, I'm figuring out what's the problem. Is the sender having any particular issue going directly to the cross-network provider? Why does IPID come in between and what value does it add? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go out on a technological limb here and say, is it possible for Damien to answer that question? It is.
Can you hear me, all of you? Can you just confirm? Yes?
Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, so good afternoon to all of you. So here, indeed, what is the role that we play? We really play a role as an infrastructure provider, essentially. And that's also how we don't displace or even compete with an MFS Africa or Tunes. We're essentially establishing a standardized API for all the sending institutions, the sending fintech, for instance, that want to send remittances into a Mojaloop environment. And we're essentially translating the logic that Mojaloop has with the different sequences in a payment transaction that Mojaloop follows. So we're translating that into a standardized payment API that they use with Mojaloop environments, but also non-Mojaloop environments. So sending remittances into other countries that don't follow the same transaction logic or payment logic that Mojaloop does. So we are that adapter, essentially, that brings efficiency and an easier way of connecting with different payment environments. I hope that clarifies to a certain extent.
Yes, if I understand it, you are abstracting the Mojaloop logic or complexity in quotes, if there is complexity for the provider. So literally you are saying if I'm a Western Union, a MoneyGram or N1, if I wanted to send and this is going to go to a Mojaloop, you are providing a different kind of API. And then the rest that is Mojaloop kind of best gets done by you. That's my understanding of what your value proposition is. But if I can do Mojaloop directly, then I may not need to use IPID, correct?
So that's correct. But the starting point and really what we're trying to achieve essentially is what I was introducing in my presentation, which is being able to do remittances based on a mobile number. Today, that is not possible. Today, you cannot do a cross-border payment purely based on a mobile number. You do need to provide all those complicated banking details, and that's what you need to do if you use, the traditional fintech and the rails of Tunes, MFS Africa, and so forth. So what we want to do is to bring that benefit of Mojaloop, which is a proxy-based payment, into remittances through that logic.
Okay, I do understand the element of proxy, but I think we need to step back and understand that what we call mobile-based, at least in the African context, you can do remittance using mobile. Across African markets, If I'm in Rwanda or in Nigeria, I'm able to just enter the number, mobile number of the person who is to receive the amount, and then the amounts are provided. So that's already in the market. In that once you are looking at that segment, of course, you have to look at what problem does it have. I think in your presentation, you did a proxy to a banking account. Maybe that is value in a European setting, but I think it may be less usable in an African setting if we are picking the number and then proxying it to a bank number. Currently, actually, it could be the reverse because we're having more wallets than the banking numbers. But that could be a business discussion on the value of it. Thank you.
Can I just add something there, Jean-Marc? Which is to say that what you say is perfectly correct in relation to MNOs. But for instance, I think it's true in sub-Saharan Africa generally that forward-thinking banks are also setting up low KYC accounts identified by a mobile number. And in that case, it would be more difficult, I think, for payments to be routed to their customers than it would for payments to be routed to the MNO customers.
I confirm, Michael. So that's what I was about to add as well. Indeed, for payment to bank accounts today, there is no way to do that based on a mobile number. And here we basically abstract that complexity. Whether it ends into a mobile money account or bank account, it doesn't matter. We leverage the convenience that exists domestically with a Mojaloop and extend that benefit to cross-border and then bring that interoperability, absolutely.
So one of the extraordinary successes of the mobile network operators has been in providing to millions of people in Africa bank accounts which are simply identified by mobile numbers, but that's still not true of everyone.
Yeah, Mike, thank you. Just my last comment. I think the initiative is noble. We just need to figure out the actual problem, at least in our markets, that we are solving. Because if it's a need to send money to a bank account, then that's fine. If it's a need to the wallet, then I think the solutions already on the market are addressing it. We just need to figure out what are the weaknesses with those solutions and then resolve that. Thank you.
So can I just say, do you know where the biggest remittance channels in the world are?
At the moment, the biggest is still cash through the traditional Western Union.
I'm thinking of the country-to-country channels.
Country to country. No, I don't have those figures of it.
Okay. Biggest of all is US, Mexico. But most of the ones below that in the top 10 are between the Gulf and the subcontinent.
Michael, if I can add something to the conversation. Mark sometimes is very technical about things, so, and I appreciate his comments, but I think what IPID is trying to do, and if I am right, what they're thinking is, for instance, this morning I tried to make payment of just 10,000 shillings to Tigo, and the cost is about 4,000 shillings. And that's ridiculous. I mean, it's crazy. But it happens to me even when I'm in Uganda trying to make payments to Safaricom from my MTN wallet, whether I'm on Airtel or whatever it may be. Still, you're paying about 30%, and it's crazy. So I think based on Mark's last submission, if, for instance, IPID is already coming and thinking about managing costs for a low-income user, then we need it. And my thought has always been that I think I've said this so many times. The last time I said it was at FinTech Connect in London and said, for me, Mojaloop is not just about us leveraging the solutions that have been created, but making sure that the conversation of doing things like this, especially leveraging open source, are adapted by many others. No matter what they're using, but as long as we are using the Rails and the examples of things like the level 1 projects and these principles, adapting blueprints like Mojaloop and what it's doing, then we are solving the problem of financial inclusion. So then it would make a lot of sense having the likes of IPID in the space. Thank you.
That's a great point, Innocent. Thank you very much indeed. We are, I'm afraid, out of time, so I will pass you back to Simeon, who will guide us all to lunch.
Thank you so much, Michael and Damien, also for joining us virtually. It is lunch hour. Now, the process for lunch, lunch is delicious, I assure you. At the registration desk, you will find Megan. If you're very nice to her, she will give you a lunch card to which you will present at the buffet line, and then you can serve. Lunch will only be 45 minutes. We should be back in this room by 2 o'clock. We've got 5 sessions this afternoon. So hopefully the excellent meal will give you a boost of energy. We will see you all at 2 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.